Widerøe's Flyveselskap, as trading as Widerøe, is the largest regional airline operating in the Nordic countries. Its fleet of 42 Bombardier Dash 8 aircraft serves 41 domestic and 6 international destinations. Widerøe has a turnover of 2.9 billion Norwegian kroner, 2.93 million annual passengers, 3,000 employees, and performs 400 takeoffs and landings each day. Public service obligation services to regional airports make up slightly less than half of Widerøe's operations. The remaining services are to primary airports in northern Norway, and services from Sandefjord Airport, Torp and Bergen Airport, Flesland to other primary airports, and some international services from Oslo, Gardermoen, Sandefjord, Torp, Kristiansand, Kjevik, Stavanger, Sola, Bergen, Flesland and Trondheim, Værnes. The company's head offices are in Bodø, although it retains a large administrative centre in Lysaker. The main bases are Sandefjord Airport, Torp, Bodø Airport, Tromsø Airport, Bergen Airport, Flesland and Oslo Airport, Gardermoen. Widerøe's operations are focused on point-to-point transit, although the airline essentially feeds medium-haul and international airlines. Widerøe has interlining agreements and participates in Eurobonus for international flights. The airline was founded in 1934 and started with airshows, aviation schools, advertisement flights, cartography and other general aviation activities. In 1936, Widerøe started scheduled seaplane flights and, from 1940, also ambulance flights. During the 1940s and 1950s, the airline increased its seaplane routes and established a main fleet of DHC-3 Otter and Nordwind Norseman aircraft. From 1968, Widerøe started flying to STOL ports built in northern and western Norway using DHC-6 Twin Otters, and later also with Dash 7 aircraft. In 1989, Widerøe bought Norsk Air and started services from Sandefjord. During the 1990s, it replaced all its aircraft with Dash 8 aircraft. In the 2000s it was bought by the SAS Group and took over SAS Commuters operations in northern Norway. In 2010, Widerøe took over regional SAS services in western Norway. History. Establishment. Widerøe was established on the foundations of two small airlines. The first was the company Lotsbergen Amp-Skappel, which Helge Skappel owned along with Liv Brun, Ditolf Smith and Erik Engenes, operating a Gypsimo. The other was Widerøe and Amp Bjørnby, which was founded by Viggo Widerøe and Halvor Bjørnby, and operated as Siemens Spartan. Cooperation started between the two companies as well as Norsk Aero Club to establish airshows in eastern Norway. During the winter, they stationed the planes at mountain resorts and made revenue from flying skiers into the wilderness. Advertisement flights were introduced, where a company product name was painted on the hull, with a neon light version underneath, and leaflets dropped from the planes. Viggo Widerøe traveled to the United States with 25,000 Norwegian kroner in 1933, and flew back a Waco cabin. The same year, the company bought 5 used de Havilland DH-60 Moths from the Air Force and started aviation schools both in Oslo and Bergen. On the 19th of February 1934, Widerøe's Flyveselskap AS was founded by Viggo Widerøe, Einar Isdal and Harald Widerøe. For the winter months, skis were equipped on the cabin and Spartan. The company also started ambulance flights. In April, the company expanded the share capital from 25,000 Norwegian kroner to 65,000 Norwegian kroner. The money was used to buy a C version of the cabin, and on the 15th of June started flying the post route from Oslo via Kristiansand and Stavanger to Horsens. During the summer, the company arranged a summer camp for youth, and the company bought a sailplane. The company started a cooperation with 4 regional steamship companies: Vesterålski, Nordenfjordski, Stavangerski and Arendalski, and on the 21st of November they established the company Norsk Kystflyveselskap and applied for all concessions to fly postal services around the coast, as well as to Gothenburg in Sweden. At the same time, Fred Olsen and Algkalv and Bergenski bought at Norsk Flyveselskap and also applied for the routes. Widerøe wanted to use seaplanes, while DNL was going to use land planes. The government urged the 2 companies to split the routes between them, but before the negotiations were completed, Cabinet Nygaardsvold was appointed, and they granted DNL a 10-year concession on all domestic flights. After losing all scheduled flights, Widerøe expanded to northern Norway and started taxi flights. In 1935, the company also started in the cartography business. In Oslo, the company built a summer base for seaplanes at Ingestrand, and a winter base for skiplanes at Bogstadvannet. Around Bergen, the airline would land at cruise ships and offer flights to tourists to see the fjords and mountains. In March 1936, 51% of the company was taken over by DNL as part of a private placement. This allowed DNL to transfer some of its concessions to Widerøe, who started flying Oslo, Lillehammer, Tretten, Gola, before Tarnholmen, Nystuen, mainly aimed at tourists. For this route, a Berlanca senior pacemaker was bought. Widerøe also wet-operated DNL's route from Oslo to Gothenburg, the route Tromsø to Honningsvåg and Bergen, Vadheim, Slidre, Balestrand. This route's in part used a Stinson-reliant. In 1937, the company made 44 flights along the coast of Antarctica, covering 4,000 kilometers of coast, at least 50 kilometers inland. These flights were ordered by Lars Christensen for cartography. From July to September, the company also flew a route between Trondheim and Bodø. The base at Bogstad in Bergen was expanded, and the company was granted a monopoly on all aerial photography flights for the mapping authorities. During 1938, the Bogstad Workshop and Birger Honningstad started a cooperation where Widerøe built the Honningstad Norge planes. The same year, a plane went to Svalbard for cartographic work, and a route was started from Trondheim via Brønnøysund, Sandnessjøen, Bodø, Narvik and Harstad to Tromsø. For 3 months, the route was expanded to Kirkenes via Hammerfest and Vadsø. Following the outbreak of World War II on 2 September 1939, all pilots were conscripted and there was a ban on civilian aviation. DNL was worried about the steady losses the company was making, and suggested liquidating the company. On 5 December 1939, DNL's shares were transferred to the other shareholders. In 1940, the company started flying ambulance flights from the military. The planes were rented from the airline while the crew were conscripted. Widerøe was also granted dispensation from the civil aviation ban to continue its school at Bogstad. Following the German invasion of Norway, many pilots and aircraft of Widerøe were flown to Josa, where they served as part of the defense. All planes were grounded during the occupation, and German authorities demanded that magnetos and propellers be handed in. The workshop at Bogstad was kept busy with production of ambulance sleds for the German military. In secret, the company also started building a Honningstad C5 Polar ambulance plane at Bogstad. The German authorities sealed the company's archives, so only people with German permission had access to aerial photos. Mixed operations after the liberation of Norway in 1945. There was still a flight ban, and the employees at Bogstad were hired by the Royal Norwegian Air Force at Oslo Airport, Fornebu. The company's Piper Cubs were restored, and the company bought a Psyche Z3 and a Fairchild Cornell for scheduled service. A Honestad Nordby was completed, and two Messerschmitt Typhoon for aerial photography were taken over from Luftwaffe. For taxi flights, the company bought three Fairchild Argus. The company received permission to fly from the 2nd of February 1946. The same year, the company's mechanical division was moved from Bogstad to Fornebu. In 1947, Widerøe bought a Republic CB, but further purchases were not permitted by the authorities to keep down the outflow of currency. That year, Forned Industria bought the majority of the company. Viggo Widerøe was again hired as managing director. The Honestad C5 Polar was completed, but serial production for the Air Force did not commence due to aid from Canada. In 1948, the company was awarded concession for a route from Arendal to Oslo. That year, the company merged with Narvik-based Polarfly, and changed its name to Widerøe's Flyveselskap and AMP Polarfly-Its. The takeover included 4 Norseman craft. This made it possible for the new company to station 2 planes at Skatterøy in Tromsø. The following year, the company innovated by taking aerial photographs of farms that were sold to the owners. In 1950, the Western Norway routes were reduced to Stavanger, Horsens, Bergen for DNL. From November 1950 to February 1951, the company again participated on an Antarctic expedition. The same winter, the company started flight training for the Air Force using Fairchild Cornell aircraft. The company also won a contract to maintain all the aircraft of that type for the Air Force. In 1951, the company replaced its Avro Anson V aerial photography plane with 4 Airspeed Oxford from the Royal Norwegian Air Force. Starting the 21st of May 1951, the company started its first own scheduled service in northern Norway, from Narvik-Vesvoll to Bodø. In 1952, the company established itself at Trondheim Airport, laid with a CB taxi and ambulance plane as well as school activity. In 1952, the northern Norway route was expanded to also serve Gravdal. The following year, a de Havilland Canada DHC-2 Beaver was bought for use in Finnmark. The company chose to differentiate, and started production of emergency rafts, refrigerated garrigas in aluminium and thermo-elements for the industry. In 1954, the company received a subcontract from Scandinavian Airlines System, the successor of DNL, to operate a seaplane route from Tromsø via Alta, Hammerfest and Kirkenes to Vadsø. For this route, the company bought its first de Havilland Canada DHC-3 Otter. That year, the company had 21 mechanics in Oslo and 14 in Tromsø, and signed a contract to service the Air Force Norseman aircraft. In 1956, the company took into use 2 Lockheed 12s for aerial photography. One of these was that year used in Liberia and Syria. The same year, the company took over SAS Last Junkers Ju-52 and put it into service on the sea route Bodø, Harstad, Tromsø, and thus Widerøe operated all of SAS sea routes. The next year, SAS granted a loan so the number of otters could be increased to 4, replacing the Ju-52. For the 1st of July 1958, the company changed its name back to just Widerøe's Flyveselskap AS. That year, both a Cessna 170 and a Cornell crashed, killing 5 people between them. The company also took over SAS Aviation School needs at Fornebu. For aerial photography in Svalbard, the company bought a Douglas RB-26C Invader. To purchase the Air Force last 9 Norseman planes in 1959 for NOK, the company cooperated with Solberg Fly and Bauer 5 for 125,000 Norwegian kroner. This proved too ambitious, and two were sold to Aero Sahara. In 1960, the first land airports in Finnmark were opened, and SAS demand for sea routes was reduced. Widerøe retired all Norseman planes from service, and were left with only otters. The contract to build a base for the military on Jan Mayen was awarded to the company's mechanical division in 1959. It was prefabricated at Fossa, and completed in 1960. In 1964, this division was made a subsidiary, Widerøe Industry AS. Until 1963, helicopter service used Widerøe for mechanical services. In 1962, the company bought a Douglas DC-3 that was put into charter traffic. The plane was prone with technical difficulties, and was replaced by one bought from Brathen Safe in September. The next charter plane was a Nord 260 Super Broussard that came in December. By 1965, the company had used 4 different DC-3s and bought 3 Nords. In 1963, new primary airports opened in Finnmark, and SAS extended the route to Kirkenes Airport, Høybergmoen. This forced all seaplane routes north of Tromsø to be terminated, and the company was left with routes between Bodø and Tromsø. The Trondheim base was closed the 31st of December 1963, following the decision to redevelop the area for industry and only use the airport at Værnes. Widerøe's management wanted to have larger aircraft for charter. It started a cooperation with Nordair of Denmark, from which the airline borrowed a Douglas DC-6 with a livery Widerøe Nordair, and started flights from Oslo in 1964. It quickly proved unprofitable and was terminated. In 1964, a DC-3 parked at Fornebu with passengers burnt up, but no one was killed. All charter operations were terminated in 1965, after the company had failed to find financing for larger aircraft. During the early 1960s, the company bought new photography planes from Cessna, a 320 and a 185. In 1964, the Bodø-Narvik route was terminated, and the following year the airline started sea flights from Bodø to the islands of Rost and Værøy using a Norseman. The ambulance bases during the 1960s were Bodø, Narvik and Tromsø, although also Alta and Hammerfest had ambulance planes stationed in 1964. New concessions for seaplanes were granted in 1966, with the routes Tromsø, Hammerfest and Bodø, Mo i Rana, Sandnessjøen, Brønnøysund, Råvik, Namsos, Hell. Additional otters were bought from the Royal Norwegian Air Force for these routes. This made it possible to sell all the Norsemans. New Cessna 411 Air 206 and 337 planes were bought in 1968 to replace the older photography planes. Regional aviation. In 1965, Håkon Killingmark from the Conservative Party was appointed Minister of Transport. He rejected the previous government's proposal to build 9 new primary airports, stating that with the contemporary funding it would take about 25 years to complete them. The last 12 years, NATO funding had been used to build new air stations, and these had also been taken into civilian use. Killingmark felt that there were sufficient primary airports, but he still saw the need to build new airports for distant areas. He proposed a network of secondary airports between Bergen and Kirkenes that would use short takeoff and landing aircraft to feed the primary airports. Parliament passed his proposal, that included also building 3 of the intended 9 primary airports. The first 4 airports were located in Helgeland between Bodø and Trondheim, Mo i Rana, Sandnessjøen, Brønnøysund and Namsos. Each airport had a 800 meters long and 30 meters wide runway, in addition to a small terminal building. Since Widerøe held the Helgeland Sea concession, they were offered to operate the route with state and SAS subsidies. The routes would take into use de Havilland Canada DHC-6 twin-otter planes and would allow all-year connections to the primary airports in Trondheim and Trondheim. The airline rented a hangar at Trondheim Airport, and all pilots needed to be recertified to sea and instrument certificates. The first service was the 1st of July 1968. The following year, the company had 1 million Norwegian kroner in state grants to the sea operations, and 850,000 Norwegian kroner in SAS grants the Helgeland route. Despite higher income than anticipated, Widerøe lost money on the trials. However, they proved highly popular among the passengers and, in 1969, Parliament voted to build new airports. The same year, SAS bought Fornid Industria's shares in Widerøe, and Per Bergsland replaced Viggo Widerøe as CEO. In 1970, the company was split in two. The aerial photography division was sold to the competitor Fjellange, and the new company Fjellange Widerøe was created. Scheduled services remained with Widerøe. The same year, the mechanical division at Fornebu was sold to Fred Olsen's Flyveselskap, and a second twin-otter was bought. In 1971, a 20% primary placement was issued and the company moved its head office to Bodø. At the end of the seaplane season, the ambulance stations in Bodø and Tromsø and the 3 remaining otters were sold. Widerøe became a pure land-based, scheduled airline. The company bought a 817 square meters hangar at Bodø Airport as its new mechanical base. The one twin-otter was sold, but the company received a permanent concession for both the Helgeland route as well as from the new airports on the west coast, Florø, Ford, Sandal and Oostervolde, that were connected to Bergen. The company also received permission to fly between Bergen, Alle and Kristiansund and Ålesund. It also took over some of SAS flights between Bodø, Bardufoss, Andens and Tromsø. A new mechanical base was built in Florø and had a 900 square meters hangar and 6 employees. The new routes started on the 1st of July 1971. Exactly 1 year later, the airports in Lofoten and Amp Vesterdalen were opened. Svolvær, Lekne, Stokmarkne and Andensen connected to Bodø. Also, the new primary airport at Molde was opened on the 5th of April 1972. 5 twin-otters were in use in 1972, with additional 2 added in 1973. The routes to Rost and Værøy were in 1972 converted to a helicopter route that was flown by Helilift using 2 Sikorsky S-58 teraseconds. In 1973, Widerøe received 1.9 million Norwegian kroner in state subsidies for the helicopter route and 13.6 million Norwegian kroner for the regional routes. That year, the company signed an option for 2 de Havilland Canada DHC-7-7. In 1974, Widerøe tested from the 1st of May to the 30th of September a route from Sandal to Oslo over the mountains. On the 1st of August, 5 airports were opened in northern Troms and Finnmark: Sorkhausen, Hammerfest, Metham, Berlevåg and Vadsø, and connected to Tromsø, Alta, Lakselv and Kirkenes. This required that the company receive 2 new twin-otters. A technical base was built at Hammerfest. 3 more airports opened afterwards: Sandane on the 1st of July 1975, Narvik on the 1st of October 1975 and Honningsvåg on the 1st of July 1977. By 1978, the company had 12 twin-otters. In 1976, a Sikorsky helicopter was bought from Helilift, and the operation transferred to offshore helicopters. It crashed in 1977, and a new Sikorsky S-58T was bought in 1978. In 1980, Offshore Helicopters was bought by Helicopter Service, who took over operation. Starting on 1 January 1982, the Rost and Widerøe routes were taken over using Bell 212 helicopters. Starting on 10 April 1980, Widerøe started an international service on behalf of SAS on the route from Trondheim to Östersund and Sundsvall in Sweden. Services terminated on 28 April 1982. The Sondre-Oslo route was taken into permanent use in 1979, but only during the summer. A Twin Otter simulator was bought in 1981. The first two -7s were taken into use in March and May 1981, with a third delivered in April 1983. The pressurized cabin planes had a capacity of 50 passengers, and Widerøe began using flight attendants for the first time. From September 1983, the -7s were used on the all-year route Oslo-Sondre-Florø. Following SAS rearrangement of routes in northern Norway in 1983, Widerøe was subcontracted the routes Tromsø-Algkalv, Bardu-Foss-Bodø, Tromsø-Evenspodø, all to be flown with -7, along with the routes to Hammerfest and Vadsø. This required a further two -7s to be delivered. The airline's last seaplane was decommissioned in 1971. In total, the airline operated 12 Twin Otters and 8 -7s at the beginning of the 1990s. In 1992, the airline made an agreement with the Norwegian government in which the airline replaced all of its Twin Otter and -7 aircraft with de Havilland Canada -8-100 aircraft, seating 37. As a result of the agreement, the SDOL network in Norway would be a Passeo operation from 1 April 1997. The airline won all the routes in 1997, but in 2000 the airline had to relinquish the route Bodø-Ross to Gardair, but regained it after Gardair folded. In 2003 the route was surrendered to Cato Air. Since then the airline has lost the routes to Andines, Fagans, Florø and Røros, though it in 2006 has recaptured the routes to Narvik and in 2007 the routes to Andines. From Sandefjord to the world in 1989 the airline acquired Norske, an airline based at Sandefjord Airport, for free from the shipping company Cosmos. The airline operated 4 Embraer EMB 120 Brasilia aircraft, and flew from Sandefjord to Copenhagen, Bergen, Stavanger and Trondheim, as well as from Skien Airport, Geitragen to Bergen and Stavanger. In 1991 the airline changed its name to Widerøe Norske, before it was amalgamated into Widerøe in 1996. The same year the Brasilias were replaced with 50-seat -8-300s. Widerøe Norske also operated the Brasilias between 1991 and 1993 on a route between Sandefjord, Torp, Kristiansand, Kjevik and London Gatwick Airport, but it was closed partially due to an over-establishment of flights from Norway. Today the airline operations from Sandefjord are its most profitable. Fred Olsen and Amco decided to buy part of Widerøe again in the late 1960s, and in 1970 Brad & Safe bought 18% of the company. In 1991 Brad & Safe and SAS sold to Fred Olsen, who owned 64% of the company. The other owners at the time were Torghatten Flyveselskap, Nordlandsbanken and Fylkesbetaling ISOGN og Fjordan. In 1997 Fred Olsen sold 29% of its stock to SAS Group, who later bought the rest of the company. Following the deregulation of the Norwegian airline market in 1994, Widerøe launched new international routes, which included flights from Bergen and Stavanger to Aberdeen, Edinburgh and Newcastle in the UK, as well as from Trondheim to Copenhagen and Stockholm. For some of these operations, Widerøe acquired 76-seat Dash 8 Q400 aircraft, after Scandinavian Airlines bought Brathens in 2002. The group decided to operate Brathens regional routes in western Norway with the SAS Commuters Fokker 50 aircraft operating in northern Norway. The routes in western Norway were until then operated by Norwegian Air Shuttle, who then became a low-cost carrier. SAS Commuter left its operations in northern Norway to Widerøe, who operate all the SAS Group's regional routes north of Trondheim. This involved that Widerøe took over the routes from Tromsø to Alta, Lakselv and Kirkenes, and the route from Evenes to Tromsø, Bodø and Trondheim from October 2002. In November 2012, SAS Scandinavian Airlines announced that it planned to sell Widerøe. SAS also plans to sell its ground handling division and as well a lot of its fixed assets, and hoped to raise around $440 million through this. Flybe has already announced its interest in an acquisition. In May 2013, the SAS Group sold 80% of its stakes in Widerøe to Norwegian investors. The sale closed in September 2013. SAS sold the remaining 20% of the airline to WF Holding in June 2016.